The overseer must be hospitable. If that strikes us as an unusual thing to see included on a list of essential qualities in a leader, there are a couple of passages that may help to shed light on the importance of hospitality, but they are not cheerful reading, I warn you. Have a look at Genesis 19 and at Judges 19. What do these two horrendous accounts have in common? Or rapes, of course, threatened in one, actualised in the other. But also, what enables those rapes? They take place, or they are threatened, because the victims are strangers in town, and as such they are vulnerable to whatever depraved desires the locals have it in them to dispense. They wouldn't treat their neighbours this way, you understand? It's unthinkable. But these strangers, the unthinkable turns out to be not just thinkable, but doable. The stranger, even if a resident like Lot, has no entitlement to justice, has no kinfolk to protect them. They have to take what's coming to them. You notice in Judges 19, what's so shocking is not just the act in itself, but the fact that it takes place in an Israelite town, amongst the people of God. Judges 19:12 makes clear that whilst they did not expect to be safe in a Jebusite city, they did presume that they would be safe amongst the people of God. That they were not told the nation a whole lot about itself. See Judges 19:29 and 30. And hospitality, or the absence of it, has a way of doing that. It reveals the truth about the heart. You see, a lot of the time we do the right thing because people are watching us, or because we're afraid of the consequences somehow if we don't. But what will we do if there are no consequences to fear and no one seems to be watching? You might want to pause the video for a moment and consider, what have you learned about people and places through being a stranger in the midst? God's people really should be good at hospitality. Read Exodus 22:21, Exodus 23:9, Deuteronomy 10:14 to 19, Deuteronomy 24:14 to 15, Psalm 39 verse 12. Strangers is a way of life for God's people in this world. They are known for it. See Esther chapter 3 and verse 8. And more than that, there is a strong hint in Isaiah 28 verse 21 that being an alien and a stranger amongst us is God's way of life here, by choice. Of course, that hint is fulfilled when Jesus comes to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. John chapter 1 verse 11. And Jesus had, as he himself said, no place to lay his head. Luke chapter 9 verse 58. Jesus didn't just expect and choose this way of life for himself. He chose it for his disciples. He chose it for us. Let's read Matthew 25:31 to 46. Notice the context. It's the day of the Lord. Jesus will be judging the nations. Well, how will he be judging them? There will be no need to call witnesses and hear testimony, because he will have been with them in person, unrecognised, experiencing the truth about them in person. And it will be the truth because he will have been amongst them all that time as the person with no rights and no one to stand up for them, with needs and no one to turn to. The person, in other words, with whom you could behave just as you liked. How exactly, though, will he have been sampling the hospitality on offer amongst the nations? The answer becomes clear when we think about who he can possibly mean when he refers to these brothers of mine. Bear in mind who he's talking to at this point. If you read Matthew 24 verse 3 and 26 verse 1, you can see that this comes at the end of a long segment of teaching given privately to his disciples, all on one occasion. And he's telling them about their life between his departure and his coming again. They will be the ones who are hungry and thirsty and strangers and naked and sick and in prison. And as such, they will have to take what's coming to them. But whatever they get, Jesus gets. And it all comes back to the throne. Everything is known there. And that's how. If this is the life of a disciple, well, surely it's going to be our life too in some form or another. And if we live as aliens and strangers ourselves, how can we possibly be insensitive to the needs of strangers in our midst? So, some questions. How have churches become such forbidding, inhospitable places? If we truly live as aliens and strangers in the world, why are we as Christians so often to be found getting all up in arms about our rights? Isn't the whole point that aliens and strangers don't have rights, and that is why whatever gets done to and for them comes freely from the hearts of the doers, for good or ill? And then a lot of churches have leaders, paid leaders, and a lot of those churches then expect the leaders to serve the people that pay them, the ones paying their wages. What happens to the alien and the stranger then? They can't pay our wages. What happens to the leader if they give in to our wishes as a church? What kind of church do you end up with? Does it fit the description that Jesus gives here of the life of these brothers of mine? If not, then where do we stand before the throne? Questions, questions. If you have been, thank you for taking part.